It's Divas That Care Radio. Stories, strategies, and ideas to inspire positive change. Welcome to Divas That Care, a network of women committed to making our world a better place for everyone. This is a global movement for women, by women, engaged in a collaborative effort to create a better world for future generations. To find out more about the movement, visit divasthatcare.com after the show. Right now, though, stay tuned for another jolt of inspiration.
Hello, welcome to the Metaphysical Mastery Podcast. This is a mother and daughter podcast, and it is to explore metaphysical, esoteric concepts. Today we are going to be talking about shadow work, but first let me introduce myself. My name is Kate Nelligan. I'm the daughter portion, and I am an equine partnered life and business coach, healer, and animal communicator. And this is one of my favorite topics, and I'm excited to introduce you to my mom, Peggy Nelligan. Go ahead and say hi and introduce yourself,
Hi.
Mom.
Hi, everyone. I was the former director of the Metaphysical Center of New Jersey, and now I'm just on their advisory board. And we have been doing programs since 1956 that deal with these topics of in metaphysics and parapsychology.
Yeah, and so today we picked shadow work because, first of all, it's like one of my favorite things to talk about and work with as a coach and in my own personal growth journey. I also find it so fascinating. There's so much more I want to know about it. So I'm so glad you put together like a document here that I'm reviewing and that will give you an option to have access to at some point to the listeners as well in the audience. But it goes through a little bit of background about what the shadow is and how we can work with it. And the reason we picked now, it's not surprising. It's October. It's Halloween spooky month. Usually they say the start of Scorpio season is often when we do shadow work, but I had an astrologer share that we're actually doing it earlier this year, that it's in Libra this year to be doing some shadow work. And obviously there's a lot of shadow that's getting exposed in war consciousness that's happening on our planet, unfortunately, right now as well. So it's the right time to be talking about this, but I, as always, like to talk about things with some lightness, so you'll probably hear me share some of my stories around this too. So, Mom, why don't you go ahead and start us off with, like, the great definitions you always come up with, but, like, how would you define the shadow, and, like, what's some of the background to it as well?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Well, it was so interesting because I always try to do the research so we can have a handout for our listeners at some point available on the metaphysicalcenter.org website. And when I was looking up definitions, I thought, the physical definition that is out there, shadow is a dark area where light is being blocked by something. And it really, even though that's the physical definition, and we're talking more of a psychological definition, it really, if we think of the shadow, the darkness, which is, it can be thought of as darkness, it's really an area of no awareness. And the light could be thought of as an area of awareness. That's simply, of what it is. When you talk at the psychological definition, this is a generic term for a person's unconscious aspect of their personality. And what happens is our personality, our ego image, has a certain ideal. And if something doesn't match that ideal, we call it the shadow. And that's the simple definition of what these words are. But the bottom line, it's really just a part of human duality. We live here on Earth. We live in a realm of duality. That's because we're both human beings and divine beings. And so everything has its opposite, up and down, good and bad, light and dark. So we have an ego personality, and we also have a spiritual or energetic component. Some religions and traditions call it the soul or the higher self. But what is going on here is that the shadow part is really in our ego personality part. And that's the part of the duality that experiences this. Our spiritual or energetic part really doesn't acknowledge this at all because it doesn't acknowledge the duality. It only lives in the here and the now, and it's only in the oneness of everything. So did I explain that, Kate?
Yeah, and I love it as like it can be traits about ourselves that may embarrass us or may trigger us, so we hide them. I saw someone else describe it as uncomfortable truths that we hide from, but ultimately we can face and overcome them, which we'll talk about that too. But I always feel like, when I first learned about shadow work, I was like, oh, like, and that is how a lot of people's reactions are. They get kind of uncomfortable just thinking about it, not wanting to deal with it, not understanding it, not knowing what it is. So the goal today was really to like educate and shine light on what it even is. If people have heard it in the personal growth world, but they haven't done much with it, or they don't even know where to go or where to start. But I find that like my first reaction to it was that kind of resistance. And now, like I saw like a mug the other day or something, and it said, "Hello, darkness, my old friend." And I'm like, "Ooh, yeah, that's so me now." Like I love being up at night. I love, Halloween. I love all of like the, like that paranormal is my entry into metaphysics, right? When I was younger, because I was never interested in religion and I was an atheist, but I always thought like ghosts or all of the paranormal stuff was very interesting. And like, because I don't know, there's a part of me that's always felt like the key to really, I guess, soul's growth is understanding the unconscious and being with it. And like, that's the shadow, right? So.
That's right. Yeah. An expression I heard or I read used, they said the shadow is kind of like the blind spot. That's all it is. It's an emotional blind spot that we have. And it could be, as you said, it could be we are deliberately ignoring it, or we, may have repressed it. We don't even know that we've hidden it. We're keeping, or we're very aware that we don't like this aspect of it, but it shows up every once in a while. It rears its little head. And so we do have to deal with it at some point.
Yeah, for me, for some reason, I've had an easier time doing shadow work than even doing inner child work, which, is interesting because the shadow and the inner child can be connected too. But, yeah, because essentially, like Carl Jung said, the persona is the social face that we present to the world, which I think of as like, that's Facebook, right? That's social media. And the shadow is that hidden part. So, yeah, I mean, people keep things hidden for a reason. Right? It usually is some form of shame or guilt, or fear, or simply just not feeling safe. A lot of things come down to that. And so that's why, but I found over the years, and it really kickstarted in, you and I both got our master's in spiritual psychology, and it kickstarted for me then when everyone was talking about the shadow constantly, right? And, or the trauma they've been through, which is connected to the shadow. And so it was like, oh, like we have permission to actually talk about this. And then it became where there was something about my empathic ability and nature that people would just like come up and start telling me things often about like their shadows, or like there's a lot of things I know about people's trauma and histories and herstories that no one else knows, or maybe one or two other people know. And it's not just now, obviously, as my role as a coach, that I know that, but it's kind of been like that for a while. And I think part of it's because I can hold the shadow with a lot of like neutrality and even just appreciation for like why it's there and what it does for us. So,
as you said, it's partly because you've done a lot of the work on your own. And I think that's very obvious when you're able to, when you've been through something. Sometimes if you've been through a disease, you know what it's like for the other person then when they're going through it. So you've done so much of that work, and I think that's probably why you are a good coach, because you understand it when people talk about it, and it's not something that you shame anybody for, or there's no reason to that. You just simply acknowledge it. And as you say, hold it with neutrality. That's great.
Well, I know that we all have it too, right? It's not like I'm unique. It's just, and there's different things in each of our shadows that we each have, which I always find so interesting. It makes, like, I attract a lot of perfectionists, and I'm just like, yeah, like, okay, well, what's in your shadow? Because perfectionism is now boring to me, right? I used to think it was like what we all aspired to, but now I'm just like, I know there's a whole lot of stuff under there that we're not being seen, right? People just want to be seen as perfect. And mostly that's so that we can feel loved, accepted, and enough. But it's like when we, like that saying from our master's program really hit home for me the most was perfect vulnerability is perfect protection, right? So as we're willing to be vulnerable about the stuff in there, in mine recently, I mean, the shadow work that I had to do recently, and I'm still in it, it's like so much grief and loss this year, and like just death, and like talking about death and loss, and like sometimes I'm just like I can't handle it anymore. Like it's been too much. Like, but it's and I'll like kind of push it away, and then I'm like, oh yeah, there's my shadow. Like, what part of me is not accepting death? Is like it's a part of life, right? But I'll push it away, or I'll have fear of it, or I won't want to deal with it. And sometimes it's also like I'm still in my grieving process for my friend who passed that long ago, and then I don't need to like add a lot more to that, right? I still need to give myself space to grieve. But that's a piece of just knowing ourselves too, and knowing like what our shadow needs. So before I jump too far, let's talk a little bit about what is in the shadow. What do we need to know? Like, why do we need to know about what's in the shadow?
Yeah, I think it's important that if you don't deal with things that are hiding, it's going to show up in either for yourself, or it's going to show up in your relationships or interrelationships with other people. That's just what happens, because you don't even know that it's, and it could be a fear. It could be anxiety, something like that. You fear a lack of friendship. And so if somebody says something about friendship, you look around and say, not you, but a person would look around and say, I don't have as many friends as so-and-so. I wonder what's the matter with me. And that's not it, but it's the little shadow showing up. Somewhere there's a fear about friendship. And so fear and anxiety are one big area where shadows show up for us. And if you look back at your life, anytime, anybody, and try and think, what are some of the things that still come to you with fear? Because that is probably where you've got an aspect of yourself that is stuck in the shadow. Negative emotions are another one where, and it can be all levels of the emotion. So take, for example, anger. Anger's okay, but maybe somewhere along the line you got angry, maybe when you were little, and you lashed out, said something, and some parents said, no, that's not right. You're not allowed to do that. And so, okay. So you keep it inside then, and what happens when you stuff things and keep them down? They bubble up at some point. You're going to get them. And that's where the shame and the guilt and bitterness, playing a victim type of thing shows up for you. So negative emotions are another area where shadows can show up. I've got more. Do you want me to suggest a couple others?
Yeah, that one makes me think of like the positive intelligence program I did, which was all around the self-saboteurs and like knowing our self-saboteurs. And like one of them is like the victim is a self-saboteur, where it's always a story of like, something's wrong. It shouldn't be this way. Why do I have to go through this? And then there's also like the perfectionist in the shadow, or the overdoer, and all of the self-sabotaging behavior is very connected to our shadow.
That reminds me, Kate, of at USM, Ron and Mary, right in the very beginning, it might have even been the first day of the first class, and the question they asked all of us was, if you could rule the world, what would you say, or what would you do? And I remember thinking, I would do this and I would do that. And that's exactly, those are the kinds of things that show up that I'm holding on to. Because if I could change it, I would make sure that I would change this. And it's so interesting how often that still shows up in my life, when, I don't like something that's happening. I just had a car problem, and, if they did it differently, and on and on and on. So, yeah, that piece shows up a little bit.
That's the
can be
judger,
mild,
but we all have the judger. And according to that program, we all have the judger as the self-saboteur, every single one of us. And that is the biggest, to me, part of the shadow, is the judgment, right? It's like, this is right, or this is wrong, or this should be this way. So throw out the word should, throw out the word have to's. And I even told a perfectionist the other day, throw out the word need to. Like, it gets, we get to say I get to, or I want to. But yeah, ultimately, I don't think there's anything wrong with like defining an ideal state. Like, if you could rule the world, what would be your ideal state? Like, that is how we vision, and that is how we create utopia and heaven on earth and all that kind of stuff, is we can vision ideal states, but we just can't make the opposite wrong or bad or negative, because then we go into resistance, and resistance is another piece of the shadow, right?
Exactly. That's right. If we don't like it, we're not only going to judge it, we're going to do our best to fight against it. And, you said that right in the beginning. That's part of the, we don't just have a shadow, by the way, and an individual. There's a collective shadow as well. And right now, that's part of what's going on with the wars that are on the planet, because there is a collective shadow of judging the other side as wrong and what you think the right thing should be. So in order to balance that, you want to fight it in some way. So that can happen both individually and on a larger scale as well.
One of my favorite questions that I still have a hard time with, but I love asking it because asking questions creates change. It's from Access Consciousness, and it goes, "What's right about this?" And it's like if we really get stuck in our position or point of view, it can stick us, and whether it's like, this is the best thing ever and we get stuck in that point of view, or we get stuck in this is the worst thing ever and we get stuck there. It's like, but if there's something going on, like what's right about this? Like I was just talking about my car accident from April, and it's like, okay, what could possibly be right about this? Like what's the bigger picture here? What's the spiritual perspective of this? Where, yeah, it felt wrong and icky and all the things. And at the same time, what good has come from this? What, looking for those pieces as well to kind of balance it out too. Because I think that's what, honestly, I think what the shadow usually needs, in my opinion, is to feel seen, heard, and then to have it balanced. It doesn't necessarily ever fully go away, I don't think, but it can lighten and it can be integrated. We'll get there. But what else? Tell me, because there's also other pieces inside of the shadow that we should talk about.
Well, one of the things, we all have self-esteem, some form of self-esteem, self-worth. And again, if your self-esteem is pretty low, you maybe find yourself doing a lot of the negative self-talk. I'm stupid. I shouldn't do that. How come? Why? Why do I? Can't believe you, blah, 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 blah. That's the one side of it. The other side of it is somebody, and we all know people who are, you can go as low as being just boastful. They make sure that the world knows about them. Or it's even as far as being narcissistic, where they only see things from their perspective and point of view. Their self-esteem is so great, they can't even see that there's another point of view for something like that. Those are shadows, even though, they're the opposite of each other, but those are also another form of shadow.
One of my favorite, which is projections, which is usually when a narcissist actually calls someone else a narcissist, which is because real true, it's anyways, and they often call empaths narcissists, which is fascinating. So talk about projections and how that's a part of the shadow.
Yeah, I was pretty fascinated to be working with this idea of the projections because, again, I remember at USM, when we talked a lot about this is a very common psychological defense mechanism that people attribute to other people what is going on in their own mind. So we displace our own undesirable feelings or thoughts or fears, whatever it would be, and put them onto somebody else. And we notice them in them, but we don't really necessarily notice it going on for us. So, for example, if somebody is very self-critical, they may not even notice that they're that self-critical or call it that, but they'll notice it in other people. And so they will then think the other people are being critical of them because they're noticing it in the other people. And it's just this, that's how the projection works, that we can kind of, what's in our mind, we then project or send out and put on another person. And I find that fascinating, that's a very common psychological defense mechanism, but it isn't only related to the shadow, but that's where it certainly finds its home.
Yeah, and a lot of what it is it's like when things get really uncomfortable, our nervous system goes into fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn. And, so it will do stuff to get people to like us if we're uncomfortable, right? And so it won't show right? It won't show the shadow side, or it will freeze it. It will push it away and not allow it to be there. And then, and then the fight can come in through projection, like calling other people stuff that you have yet to own about yourself, right? Like, I've always loved that image of if you point one finger, you have three fingers pointing back at you. And so to me, it's like, if you ever really want to call someone something, you get to really look at, why you feel the need to do that, and like, can you work with your own anger? And then underneath anger is hurt. And what are you really hurt about? And can you express that? Like, I feel hurt, versus calling names, and then often like the names that we call, like, yeah, maybe there's some truth in that about the other person, but really it's usually about yourself. If you're not doing the inner work, really deep inner work to know yourself. Like, I know if I was to ever say something about someone that I've already looked at, is this in me? What level of this is mine? What level, looked at personal responsibility pieces, because ultimately that's really one of the biggest pieces with shadow work, is that we take personal responsibility for having a shadow and then for doing something with it. So we don't dump it on others, and we don't use it, in the fight, flight, or freeze situation. And like, to sit with the uncomfortableness is a way of working with it. But yeah, it's important. Yeah. What is shadow hugging? I have never seen this. You wrote about this, and I'm like, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I found that's the first time I had ever really heard of that concept of the golden shadow. Again, it goes back to USM. We really learned so much in that course. But the idea is that not only do we project onto other people the things that we don't like, we see that, we project our own onto them. But very often, think of yourself, people who you admire, and it's not just admire, but almost, you look up to them so much, and it's almost like they can do no wrong. And the reality is, we can get to a point of even hero worship, and we don't understand that what we're really doing is we are projecting our own quality onto them. If we didn't, I remember hearing that at one point, if we recognize the trait in somebody else, it must already exist within us. And so if you're feeling, very positive about somebody else, look to yourself and see, where does this exist in me? It's not that it doesn't exist in the other person, but where does it also exist in you? And I think that's what the idea is. So yeah, hero worship and shadow hugging is where we hold on to that shadow and, just see it in other people, but never see it in ourselves. So
I've heard hero worship, but I had not heard shadow hugging, and I think that's hilarious. And I also feel like, yeah, if you spot it, you got it. And it's funny because USM, where we got our master's in spiritual psychology, for those that don't know USM, and Ron and Mary are the teachers, we did have projection worksheets where we had to fill out against, like, who do you think is the coolest person on the planet? Write down all the qualities about them. And then, like, can you see them in yourself? And same thing with, like, the person that makes you super uncomfortable. And it's funny because I didn't realize that I was doing, like, shadow hugging with people, but, like, when they come work with horses, they're always like, that horse is so beautiful. That horse is so majestic. That horse is so powerful. She's so sweet. She's so kind. And my thing is, I always say it to usually women, can you say that about yourself? And they blush or they get insecure. And it goes to the shadow part of the self-esteem where they're like, oh, I'm less than, or I don't see that in myself, or I can't. Women are often taught we can't be boastful, right? We can't. And I'm like, hey, we should all be bragging about how awesome we are because we work hard for, the stuff that we achieve, right? So let's share it. That's my whole thing. It's exciting to celebrate wins. We see a lot of other stuff. We might as well celebrate our wins, But ultimately, I see it with the horses where people project on them all the time, positively project. Also, when I started working with addicts in recovery, they started to project the negative stuff. Well, that horse doesn't like me. If a horse didn't say hello to them when they went up to say hello to them, and I'm like, oh, wow. Like, so we got the stories illuminated very quickly. That's one of the things, like, the horses are so clear about showing us where things are incongruent and showing us faced. So, like, I have done more shadow work with my horses than any place else on the planet because I literally can't walk up to them and be like, I'm good, and then be, like, angry about something because they're like, immediately they'll do something that makes me angry. And I'm like, oh, I'm really feeling angry today. You're right. I'm sorry. I own it. I've got it. Like, okay, let me just use the anger. Let me transmute it. Let me compost it into the earth or into the sky, right? Like, but we have to process, like, with them, I find the shadow so significantly. But yeah, that's why I created the card deck too, because it's 40 emotional qualities that are things that people do need to, like, really own about themselves in that kind of emotional intelligence, self-confidence, self-esteem place where it's like, yeah, you can be trusting, you do have trust, right? Or you do have kindness, or you do. So I wanted people to really, and the horses wanted people to really own these qualities about themselves, because I do think sometimes one of the things in the shadow that we don't always talk about is just like that lack of self-esteem or self-worth is there, and that enoughness, I think, is the core wound that a lot of us face as human beings, right?
Mm-hmm. That's true. Very much so.
So I started talking about how the horses work with the shadow. How else can we start to work with the shadow? What are some things that you've seen?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to really understand that what we're trying to do is integrate the shadow. The shadow part, the aspects of us that we don't like or fear or whatever, they want to be part of our whole personality. Remember, we're two things. We're human and divine. And so we really want to have a whole personality, not fragmented or flaked off and disarray. We really want to try and have a shadow that have a personality that is whole, that is integrated, that is authentic. And in order to do that, there are really some things that you can do to try. One of the activities, again, we keep referring back to USM the whole time, but there's a process called Gestalt, where what you do is you find the shadow, you find when it shows up, and then you face it, you talk to it, and then you become it. And the simple technique is just think of whatever it is, anger, fear, resentment, and you literally, if whatever came up for you, see it, imagine in your mind, sitting down in a chair opposite you. You don't know what it looks like, but it's anger. It's called anger, and sitting there. It may actually show up as a thing, but it may just be energetic. And whatever it is, you dialogue with it. You talk to it. Ask it questions. Why? Why are you doing this? How come, whatever is the issue was that brought it up, what is it that you're doing? So this puts the anger outside of you. It's kind of like, a third person. It's sort of out there. And what you want to try and do is figure out what triggered that anger in the first place. Then what you do is you talk to it, and you actually go through and ask it questions. Why did you come out of nowhere? It just seemed that you popped up. And see what anger has to say to you. It actually responds. And we've done this enough so that I know that this is real. You actually will hear in your head actual words, ideas, thoughts will come to you, what the anger is trying to say to you. And then you get to a point where you actually switch places. You can literally, if you're doing it for real, you get up and sit in the other chair, and then you become the anger. You actually, it's no longer outside of you, but you start to re-own the quality, and you take back that anger, even though it seems like it's a negative quality. But this helps you sometimes to develop maybe an early memory, because very often these things show up, these shadows show up somewhere between birth and 7. That's a very, very vulnerable time of our lives. We've talked about that before in another podcast where, we're at the alpha level, or even beta, not beta, but theta level, and we will actually take things on into our subconscious we're not even aware of. So if we can tap into that at this point, that's one way that we can bring it up to the light and then integrate it and be part of the whole personality again. Did you have an experience with Gestalt? Yeah?
I love Gestalt. I could go on and on about Gestalt. I mean, I will say that it is easier sometimes to do with a practitioner that knows how to, help you move in and out of things so you don't, the disclaimer I'll put on Gestalt is it can pull up stuff. Like, you can become aware of things and memories that can be traumatic. And so it has to be done with consciousness and with love. And, it is something that I personally I like to do it with a practitioner. So a therapist or a coach that's had training in it. It is some of the equine, coaching, they focus on Gestalt a lot. Our master's program certainly was one of the 8 counseling strategies they taught us. Get mostly when I'm dealing with the body and I want to talk to the body, like, hey, okay, headache, what information do you have for me? And I don't need to do the whole chair thing because I work so quickly inside of my consciousness where I just talk to myself all the time anyways. So it's like I get that information really fast, just intuitively and being connected to things. But yeah, I mean, my favorite, like, kind of easier entry into the shadow is what also we learned in spiritual psych, which is freeform writing, or, some form of like automatic writing, which is a little bit different, but to light a candle or create like sacred container or ceremony space and just take out a blank piece of paper and write with the pen because your heart's connected to your hand, and just write out all your emotions. So like I just gave this exercise to someone. There's been a lot of car accident stuff, but I gave it to someone who's in a car accident. I'm just like, just write, like, screw you accident, screw you person who hit me, and just write it all out, get all the emotion out, get the anger out, get the judgment out, get the frustration out, get the sadness out, get the and then burn it or, safely, or shred it and release it. You don't read it over. It doesn't need to be perfect. I used to do really specific words. Now, literally, you can look at my freeform writing, it just scribbles. I really just scratch the paper is what I do. And it moves the energy out of the body. It gives it a voice, which I think is sometimes what the shadow needs. The shadow doesn't need a voice in your intimate relationships where you're yelling at someone else. That is damaging to a relationship. But the shadow needs a voice with you and yourself, or between you, yourself, and God. And to be able to release it that way, it's so powerful. And then what you'll see often is you'll see a shift. You'll come into, I remember the first time I did this so powerfully, I did it with my brother, and I was really angry and I was very triggered about something that happened. And I wrote until all of a sudden my heart just burst open and I felt all this compassion and all this forgiveness and all this love. And then I was able to it was gone. It was just totally, the energy was gone. So I like the freeform writing process even better. I did it recently about something where I felt embarrassed and ashamed of something. And there's my shadow laugh. By the way, we didn't talk about shadow laugh, but you heard me do it so perfectly. So shadow laugh is something where it's still a little uncomfortable, and your way of your body and nervous system sort of dealing with it is going or laughing it off. And so now I'm really aware when I'm coaching someone if they do a shadow laugh or if I do one, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I still have a tiny little bit there. Sometimes it's also just it's humorous to me now that I was upset about that a couple of weeks ago. So it's also just, there's lightness to it now. But I think sometimes, if stuff's still bugging us, one of the best ways is to also just to sit with it. You mentioned meditation if you want to talk about that, but that's another powerful thing.
Yeah, there are a lot of techniques that people can look up. TA or transactional analysis is an old time way that you can do it, and that's to actually look at the ego states of parent, adult, or child, and which one is operating when you're talking. That's good to know. So you can look up transactional analysis. You can also look up emotional alchemy, and that's a little bit of what you were just talking about, but it's more of a technique than the freeform writing that you were talking about. But what it does is it focuses on the message that the emotion is bringing forth, and that's what you want to do. And then you can push a pause button and just wait and see what that emotion, the emotion is bringing up for you. And that then, that pause. What's that quote, Kate, with Viktor Frankl? they talk about
between power, between stimulus and response, there's space. In that space, I have the power to choose, which was in the worst shadow possible in the Holocaust, when he realized that what was happening, but how he related to what was happening was really where the suffering was, and that he could see suffering but didn't have to suffer himself, and he could choose his response instead of react to it, and it's what kept him alive, is what he says in Man's Search for Meaning is his book. It's super cool and really intense when you think about it right now, on how I can feel the collective energy of even that. So yeah.
But then a simple one that you don't need to know either of these analysis and therapies to do is just sitting and meditating on the shadow. Call upon your guides, your guardians, your guardian angels, and just go into an altered state. We've talked about meditation. Most likely our listeners know a bit about that. And bring yourself to an altered level. Just count back from 3 to 1. Slowly, deep breaths, and you'll bring yourself into that state where then ask for help. If you form some kind of a judgment about another person or whatever, this will bring it up for you, and you can look at it more objectively than being right in the moment when the emotion is occurring. It's much, much easier to do that. You can also look at it with another person. Very often, people's behaviors, we don't recognize that it's a shadow behavior, and so we respond to that behavior. But when you go in a meditative state and think about it, you can actually then look at that behavior and say, that isn't really what that person is like. That most likely was their shadow acting out at that point. And so instead of judging them, then you're able to actually look at them for who they really are. And that's the purpose of all of this anyway, is just to bring the shadow to light and then integrate it, both for yourself and other people.
Yeah, and you're making me realize that there's so many different books and teachers that talk about the shadow, but without directly talking about the shadow, right? So, for instance, what you just described about seeing, like, I'll use my words, like hurt people, right? Seeing that someone who's really hurting is someone who's lashing out and they're acting out of their shadow self, like having compassion for them. I mean, there's stuff in Course in Miracles on that. Like, if you really explored back for far enough in someone's life, you would see why they are the way they are, right? And you could have more compassion. Boundaries is a huge piece when we do shadow work, that we learn to find, and so that we don't need to avoid things, but we can be present with things, and then we can set the power response or the empowered response is to have set healthy boundaries. But I'm also thinking about Byron Katie's work and Loving What Is, and asking all the questions that she does and what she calls the work, where you ask, is this really true, right? Is this really true about the person? I do find sometimes bringing humor to the shadow helps too. I think that's why comics are so popular, because comics literally are like giving you the voice of the shadow a lot of the time, which can be, some pieces of prejudice or some pieces of judgment. And, we laugh because at some point, like, we may have experienced that. And it is a little bit at times, like a lot of comics, it's shadow laughter. But at least I think if stuff can be brought into the light, it can be dealt with, whereas it's often stuffed. In the 3 areas I always say people have shadow stuff in, and it's okay, like, just know that you're not alone, is food and, food's one, money, sex, and, I guess those are 3. The 3 things that we need and talk about are, like, on a daily basis, or in our life sometimes on a daily basis. Another would be religion, right, or God.
I was going to say religion.
That's a big one too. But it's the other things sometimes in our daily existence, and then we have to look at, but when we start talking about it, it's healing, because I think awareness itself is a piece of the healing process, and then we can go into forgiveness. But if we're not even willing to go somewhere, Like I recently had to clear a huge shadow past life. First one in all of my work on my past lives that I've had to do. All my other past lives stuff has happened to me. I've been the quote unquote, we'll call it victim for a second. But then in this past life, I was the perpetrator. And it talk about really having to clean up a shadow side of myself, really big stuff. And what the side of doing the shadow work is you get your power. You become more powerful, not from a place of dictatorship or conquering. That's not power. From a place of love, because you're integrated, you're whole, you feel enough, you feel like you can handle things, you can handle other people's darkness and not be so afraid, which means you can be in greater intimacy and vulnerability with them, right? So there's so much benefit, in my opinion, to doing the shadow work, even if it's super uncomfortable. And sometimes it can get you have to do it with other people. This past life stuff, I had to do it with other people. I could not just do it on my own. And I didn't need to know all the details of it too to be able to heal it, which is also really cool. And we don't always need to know all the details of our trauma to be able to heal it, which is so wonderful if you think about it, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think part of what you're saying is that we don't need to know everything there is behind it. We just need to become aware of it. And that's what this is all about. If we can just, find the quality that we want to look at and realize there's an opposite quality to it, whatever there is, because we live in this duality. You're going to have love, you're going to have hate, you're going to have joy, you're going to have sadness. When you find whatever the shadow part is, you can look for the opposite, whatever that is. And that's when you focus to live your life then based on that opposite trait. That's why one of the reasons we have duality here is that we are here to learn the lesson of where the midpoint is. So I can remember Ron and Mary talking about, the soul line and the goal line, and you go off for a little while here, and then you go off for a little while there. And we go back and forth. We don't stay on the straight and narrow all the time. And so if we are aware that we are off kilter, we bring ourselves back again, either way. And I think that's the important point, is to just find where the balance point is as much as possible. So if you see, you can do it, as you've said so clearly and well, with another person, whether it's a coach or psychotherapist or someone along that line, or you want to work on it all by yourself. Either way, you want to try and find the balance point in your own life for wherever that shadow is bringing up for you. It sounds like you did with that experience that you had too. You were able to kind of bring it all back.
I mean, ultimately, sometimes we won't move forward in a direction we need to move forward to, right? I'm going to use something broad, like me as a healer, if in the past I've misused healing abilities, right? So it's one of those things where how do we, or spiritual gifts, right? So how do we work with, I need to move forward into my calling, into my purpose more. I'm ready to up level, but there's this thing kind of holding me back, and it's usually the shadow. And so it's important that we can deal with it and integrate it. And I also love Matt Kahn's work, because he says, love what is, and, or love what arises, I think is his book. And his whole thing is just sit with your fear. Go and sit with your fear and say, oh, I see you. Oh, you're afraid of that? Okay, I hear you. Yeah, that makes sense. You'd be afraid of that. Talk to it the way you would a loving child, and be with it. And okay, I see your guilt on that. Okay, I see your shame on that. And be with that, love it. Often that's all it needs, and then it's okay, bye. It doesn't, it's and we don't loop it. We don't stay in it. I mean, I certainly love the emotion code work I got trained in this year, because I've been doing a lot lately, and it is all of the, we'll call negative emotions, and there's so many more than I even knew were possible. There's one, forlorn, that keeps coming up for a lot of people, and it's longing paired with sadness, but it's also a loneliness. It's an interesting, complex emotion that gets trapped. And so, hopelessness is another one that's coming up a lot, or helplessness, or failure. And so we can just work in releasing these things too through different modalities. So I love Emotion Code and Access Consciousness to also release trapped emotions, because we don't have to keep this stuff if we don't want to. Once we're ready to let it, at some point we decided it got trapped, whether we don't usually even consciously decide to trap something, but it gets trapped. And Dr. Bradley Nelson describes how that happens, and then we can release it, right? So I'm so grateful I have all these clearing techniques, because I run clearings on myself and other people and animals pretty much every single day now. So, it's some cool stuff to be able to do this work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad you wanted to pick this topic, Kate, because I do think it's something that a lot of people, they may not have even heard that word used that way, shadow. I mean, I really wasn't that familiar with it until we had to explore it, in the master's program. But I think it's a very, very important thing that people are aware of. So I'm so glad you decided, to choose that topic, and we would work on it.
Yeah, and ultimately, people can start with looking at what are you maybe avoiding? What do you, what are you really, I heard something really interesting the other day about mapping procrastination to depression, which I'm so fascinated by now. But there's what are we not addressing? What are we hiding? What are we avoiding? And then can we lean into it? Can we run the experiment that if we view with it even 5% more today than yesterday, could it alleviate? Could it move, right? Instead of, because otherwise these things do have a way of shaping our lives and our perspective, our worldview, our realities, and kind of gnawing at us and bugging us until we really are able to face them. That whole face your fear, feel your fear and do it anyways, face your fears thing is a big piece to this. But one of my favorite resources to leave people with, it's been a while, Debbie Ford was, I think, one of the trailblazers in shadow work, and she created a documentary called The Shadow Effect, and she interviewed a bunch of just spiritual teachers on different concepts around the shadow. And it's cool. And she has, what is her book, Mom? The Dark Side of the Light Chasers, or the Light.
Yeah. She has many books, actually. There are many books out. Yeah.
So she's really, she's not with us anymore, but she used to do 2 to 3 day immersion shadow workshops. And I was someday I'm going to get brave enough and I'm going to go do that, because facing your shadow in a group is also holy crow. I have so much awe and appreciation for people who do shadow work in front of other people, which happens in my equine coaching workshops. But if you think about AA and how that is just fully owning shadow, because it's just, there's so much out there where people are doing this work, and it's so brave. So if anyone's done shadow work, I acknowledge you for being brave. Thank you. Keep going. Share about the benefits with others so that people will do it. Because we kind of all need to heal and realize we're not broken. We just have parts and pieces that can be integrated back into wholeness so that we're more powerful, loving beings. And that's really the goal. So Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things, a connection with that I wanted to make was addictions are related to, it shows you kind of the power of the shadow when we get addicted. And it can be something as simple as being addicted to playing games on the computer. Or, it could be as serious as being addicted to drugs or alcohol, and that's why the AA thing works, because it does bring people to a point of having to acknowledge that this is a problem. So, if anything you feel like you're addicted to in whatever level, look at it, take a look, because that might be another place that shows up one of your shadows for you. Yeah, and ultimately it helps to keep things in perspective that at the end of the day, we all want to be loved and valued. We all want to feel safe. The ego wants to be in control, which is the big illusion and joke. But ultimately, it's we can help our nervous systems by doing lots of different things. Being in nature is a huge one, and grounding is another one. So we've talked about healing modalities on a different podcast. We've talked about the guides and guardians, spirit guides and guardians on a different podcast. So people can go back and listen to some of these too, to support some of this. And I just encourage people to be brave, because usually, I found, having worked in addiction for a while, a lot of it stems to loneliness, which just stems to wanting to feel more loved. Or if we feel unsafe and out of control, and addiction is our way of gaining control. So then we look at what else can we choose, and what are the pattern interrupts and those of us who are breaking cycles of patterns that are ancestral, that, it's like, this is big work we're doing on the planet right now. So I just want to give gratitude to everyone who is willing to even listen to this and B, do the work, share the work, help others with the work, hold space for those who are doing shadow work. It is a huge, huge blessing and gift. So thank you to those who are doing this.
I agree.
Awesome. Any last comments, Mom, as we wrap things up?
I think one of the most important things that I would want people to realize is that the shadow is not bad. The shadow is not evil, and it's not something outside of us. A lot of times, even when you talk about, not you, but when it's being talked about, it's as though it exists elsewhere or something else. But it isn't. It's just one aspect of you. And I think that's the important thing for people to just remember, that because we live in this duality, it's, we've picked up things from our society, from our culture, as well as from our family, and we've learned to integrate them, sometimes not so good. And I think that's where the problem comes in. But if we can honor that and acknowledge it and recognize it, as you say, it all comes back to love, if we both sending it and receiving it. And if we can just be aware of that, that's what we're trying to do with the shadow. We're trying to bring it together with the other parts of our personality. And as you say, when it happens, when it's done, it'll like, okay, I'm done, bye. That won't show up for you again. It is amazing how that does happen. So that's all. That's the last thing I think I wanted to share on that is just to honor. As you said it well, honor the work that's being done by everybody with this area, both in yourself and with others. Sure.
I mean, it's really brave, courageous work. So I'm always in awe and just very appreciative of people who come and work with me and are willing to face it. And I always say, if you're willing to work with a horse, you're super brave, because they'll just immediately call you out on the incongruencies and they expose the shadow. I don't even know how they're always doing it. I think it's because their intention is wholeness, integration, and light, that they want us to see the stuff that's there. And so, like, I've seen parts of my shadow and myself that I never knew existed until I got in front of a horse, and especially a powerful female mare horse that's like, yeah, I see you and I know who you are and I'm going to show you right now. And then, we get to do this work, and like, we can bring lightness and joy to it. It doesn't have to be super heavy. At times it can be, but there's so much benefit to doing the work and going through it. And the only way to the other side is truly through it. But there's so much like lightness and spaciousness and joy and like wholeness and vibrancy and higher frequency that's there once we do this work. That's why I love it. That's why I do it, because there's so much benefit in it. And, it also just feels like something I committed to do while I was here, in this lifetime, to work through stuff. And sometimes stuff, the more we do it, the faster and easier things can process through. But the reality is we're justified in a lot of our emotions. And if we hold on to them, we make our reality worse. We fight what is. And so when we can come into acceptance, what's that quote? Like, if you fight reality, you lose 100% of the time. 100%. So it's like, if we come into acceptance, it gets easier. So it's okay to feel angry. And then what do we do to like move that emotion through? Right. And realize too, that grief and loss triggers other grief and loss. And so just to have a support system and to be your own support system is really important in the shadow work as well. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mom. I appreciate all the stuff you put together on this. And I'm glad you were willing to dive in. This was definitely a topic I picked, so I'm glad you were willing to do it.
No, it's great. No, it's really good. Thank you. very much.
Awesome. Well, hopefully this is helpful to everyone. You can check out metaphysicalcenter.org for more information on handouts on all of our topics in the future when we have that ready, and for when the different podcasts are coming up in the topics. And we're usually doing this the third Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Eastern. And you can check out my website at katenelligan.com as well if you want some more information or you want to talk to me about this wonderful world of shadow. And we'll be sharing this, so feel free to also share it and also check out the other podcasts on the Divas That Care network. So thanks so much for being here and for listening. We appreciate you.
Thanks for listening. This show was brought to you by Divas That Care. Connect with us on Facebook, on Instagram, and of course on divasthatcare.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss a thing.